Hi, and welcome to Dollars and Making Sense, a weekly show about finance, money, and investing. I'm your host, Ray Treverson from OTG Capital. This program is proudly sponsored by OTG Capital, providers of private debt asset class investment solutions, and we have a website, www.otgcapital.com.au. That's the paid promotion bit. We are a radio show that is all about financial education. We broadcast locally on Radio Northern Beaches and around Australia through the Community Radio Network, compliments of the Community Broadcasting Association of Australia. I'm really proud to say that we're now syndicated to over 15 radio stations across the country, and I'm hoping that reach will continue to grow. It's always lovely to hear from our listeners in regional areas of the country, so please keep those emails. I did get an email just recently from one of my guests from the Australian Shareholders Association, and it was just really nice, warm feeling in my heart that people are out there, so that's always nice. I'm really pleased to welcome back to the microphone and camera this week Jen Richardson. Now, Jen is a money counsellor, a financial counsellor. She's an ex-financial planner and an accountant. Now, that's a heck of a lot of qualifications. And one of the things that attracted me to Jen's show is that, like Philippa Hunt, that we've had on the show many, many times over the number of years, Jen does a lot of work around women and financial stress and duress. And again, I would point you to her website. It's jenrichardson.co. If you're not sure, internet search engines will find it for you, or some whiz-bang AI bot, what the heck. But one of the nice things there's a really good program there called My Money Makeover. And Jen, maybe 30 seconds if you can tell the audience what that's about.
Thanks, Ray. Yeah, My Money Makeover is about teaching women how to take control of their money, how to get themselves out of debt, and how to build wealth for financial planning purposes to see what they have in retirement, how long it's going to last, and what things they can do. So it's doing the things that you're not taught how to do with money.
Great. Now, that builds on really well from a previous show we've just recorded recently about debt. Hey, I mean, it's really easy to get into debt, but the nice thing is we've also worked out how to get out of debt too. And I think one of the really big takeaways I got from that show was that it's very much a mind game, a headspace game. The mathematics and the spreadsheets of it are all reasonably straightforward, but I think it's getting into the headspace. So this week, again, it's incredibly topical, but cost of living. And one of the things that I think attracted me to this blog was the title is How to Manage Money When the Cost of Living Keeps Climbing. Now, I think one of the things, you and I are old enough, we've lived through a lot of things, a lot of cycles, but COVID was one of those times that I scratched my head when all of a sudden I never expected it, but the cost of real estate went through the roof. And the stock market went through the floor, and everything was upside down. And so 6 years later on, inflation is still one of those really interesting things that I don't think too many people have got a hold on, but we're living it day by day, aren't we? When we go to the grocery store, when we're going to the bowels or whatever. So you use this term, the overwhelm is a system problem. Now, I read that and I didn't know quite what it meant, so I'm going to flick that back to you. What do you mean when you say the overwhelm is a system problem?
Yeah, so Ray, when people think about their money, they always say, I don't know what I'm doing, I'm hopeless, and things like that. When I sit with people or when I'm working with them with my coaching, I find that the overwhelm is the greatest barrier that they have, because we throw our hands up in the air and we go, I can't do it. Everybody thinks you need to do a budget. I don't want to do a budget and all of these sorts of things. I do not believe in budgets. I do not believe in them. But what I do believe in is creating a system for your money to control it. So we've all been shopping, we've all tapped on our card, and we all come home and then we wonder why we don't have any money for the rest of the week. And that was because tapping and not keeping track of where we were was a systems thing. So I always tell people, find out where you're spending your money. You can't beat that knowledge. Do the math, sit down, work out how much you're spending on groceries, how much on kids, how much on going out and things like that. But once you've got that knowledge, we then use what we call a 6-bank account system. So we have one account where all of our money goes into, and we transfer out of that for the purpose of the money. And so what it does is the money comes in, you leave in that account all the bills that you have. So, your mortgage or your rent, your car registration, all those things that you need to set aside. But then you transfer to a spending account from payday to payday. That should come down to nil. And I don't say that, throw it all over there and go hell for leather. I'm saying you've worked out what you need to spend. And that's the process of, finding it what it is. So, that covers your groceries, your coffee on the way to work, your lunches, those sorts of things. And then we have I call it a Queen Bee account because it is a female literacy program, but it's the luxury account. And that's the things where we save for, our Christmas presents, our birthday presents, the brunch with girlfriends, the weekends away, and all those things that bring you pleasure in life. We have an emergency fund because we all have emergencies in our life, and, the only thing guaranteed is that something is going to go wrong, and then short-term and long-term savings. But by having that system in place, you know that you can only spend what's in that everyday spending or what's in your luxury account. You cannot touch your emergency fund, you cannot touch your goals, and you cannot touch your bills account. So that's the system that will control you spending your money. And that's the system that needs to be in place.
I've heard similar things, buckets. I've heard people use the analogy around buckets. They put money into buckets and then say, that's the life maintenance bucket, that's the have fun bucket, that's the rainy day bucket, that's the emergency bucket. So same kind of concept, I guess.
Absolutely, it is. And I always say, I'm old enough to know when my father, when I was growing up, he got a little brown envelope every Thursday and he would come home with the cash. And I never tell anybody to use cash in, the cash envelope system, because if there's a break-in or anything like that, there is some protection between using. But this replicates that. My dad would come home and every Thursday Mum would be given her housekeeping money, which was her everyday spending account that we do. That's what she had to go and spend on groceries and giving us kids the money we needed for school and all those sorts of things. So that's what this replicates. And it's certainly something that I've used. I make no secret of this, Ray. I am an accountant. I've been an accountant since I was 18.
You don't have to apologise for that, by the
way. People sometimes say, do we need a personality injection? Maybe.
I'd never say that.
But I lived my 20s on credit card.
Really?
Because as an accountant, we're taught the legislation, we're taught how to create tax returns. Nobody in those days had ever gone into the personal side of things. So, I lived a very good life in my 20s. I had lots of shoes and I had lots of clothes and I had a lovely life, but I was paying credit card interest because I didn't learn how to control my money.
Damn.
So my money makeover came about because I just one day went, this is ridiculous. I'm a really well-educated woman. I can't even control my own money. And I came up with this system. I came back from my honeymoon and we had $10 sitting in our account. And that was when
Brilliant.
I drew the line.
You had a great time.
And, and we didn't have a lavish wedding or honeymoon or anything. So it wasn't like that was where it went. But I went, I've got to find out where we're spending our money. And so that was the start of what I do in my money makeover.
Cool.
Is I set up exactly, I found out where we were spending our money. And I'd say, I said to my new husband, right, this is all we've got to spend until you and I get paid in a week's time. And we created these systems for us. And then again, when my kids were young teenagers, now I've got 3 boys. And at the end of the month, I was on good money, but at the end of the month, we had nothing left. And so that's where I created the rest of the system that I do. So this has all been things that I've put in place for me and my family.
That's fascinating because I guess I correlate interestingly, around my 20s, I was an army officer. And as a junior officer, one of the tasks you got every fortnight was I was the pay officer. So I'd sit there and I'd be counting out everyone's pay. They then sign for it, salute, pay correct, sir, and march off. And they would then have their cash in hand, and I would pay myself, and away we go. And you are describing very much what the situation was, certainly in the 80s for me. And I was saying to my soldiers at the time, because most of them couldn't manage money, I don't even want to go into that for a long, bunch of reasons, but I would simply say, look, try and save just 10%, because they'd go and spend it anyway. But it still comes back to what we've talked about already in a number of shows, planning. It's about writing it down on paper. And when I first got married, my wife didn't do much of that. She had a great wardrobe, a lot of shoes, just like you, actually.
I used to call them my tools of trade.
Well, the funny thing is, you're saying all these things. I'm going, oh, Mary did that, and Mary did that, and Mary did that. Well, it's like you guys must have known each other, down the road from each other. When I started dating my wife, she didn't have a bean in the bank, but she had a great wardrobe, and that's cool.
My husband was very frustrated when I met him because he had no debt. He, had all this stuff, but oh God, I had a good shoe wardrobe and clothes wardrobe. But
Mary didn't mind my debt. I had a mortgage, so I'd bought an apartment before I'd met her. So that worked out well. But look, we're going to get into some of the meat and potatoes of your blog, because I think you've got some really good concepts there. You're here on Dollars and Making Sense, a weekly show about finance, money, and investing. I'm here with Jen Richardson, who runs a wonderful financial education service out of the Hunter Valley. She's got a number of money management programs on her website, and she's an accountant with a personality. It's amazing, isn't it? We're going to take a short break, and we'll be back in just a moment. Hi, and thank you for listening to Dollars and Making Sense, a weekly radio program about finance, money, and investing on Radio Northern Beaches and nationally on the Community Radio Network around Australia. The views, comments, and opinions aired during our program should not be construed or viewed as financial advice. Any commentary is general advice only and does not take into account your objectives, financial situation, or needs. You should consider whether the advice is suitable for you and your personal circumstances. If in doubt, you should contact an authorised licensed financial planner. We welcome questions and feedback, and you can get in touch with us via our blog, social media channels, or email. Please search for Dollars and Making Sense in your favourite podcast platform, or check out our blog at otgcapital.com.au/blog. Hi, and welcome back to Dollars and Making Sense, a weekly show about finance, money, and investing. I'm your host, Ray Treverson. I'm really pleased to have at the microphone today Jen Richardson. You can find Jen on the internet at jenrichardson.co. There's a lot of really good stuff on that website, ladies and gentlemen. Dollars and Making Sense is all about financial education. That's one of the reasons I've got Jen on the show, because that's what she is all about. She runs a business, obviously, as do I. But part of what we do, I think, is our bit to give back to communities, to provide education, to help people make better of what they do with their money. And today is no different. We are talking about managing money when the cost of living keeps climbing. I'm looking at a blog at my screen here, by the way, and we'll put a link to this blog on my website. And I guess, Jen, you'll do the same when you get these recordings. And again, we talked about the overwhelm, and this was also something we talked about in the show that we talked about debt. But one of the things that really caught my eye, and I like this because it's a pivot point. If people are unsure or flying blind in this current situation, what is the first number they need to find out about and be honest about? What is that?
The first thing they need to find out is what they actually spend. People will use the overwhelm, and cost of living is ridiculous, don't get me wrong, but you need to know where your money is going, where you're spending it, because if you don't make decisions based on information, then you're not making a genuine decision. You're taking a gut reflex action. And so many people will say to me when I'm talking to them about putting plans in place to get rid of debt, like we talked about in an earlier podcast, starting to build financial wealth, because that's the ultimate aim of what we all want our listeners and our viewers to do, and the people doing my course. That's what I want them to do, because I want them to have a life that they want, not just the life that they can afford. But part of doing that is finding out where you can make changes, and you can't find out where you can make changes without looking. And so a lot of people will say to me, can't do it, cost of living's ridiculous. Well, there's lots of ways, look at your general stuff like your your electricity bills, your telephone bills, and all of those, to see if you can get better deals, because every provider has what I call a loyalty tax.
I agree. I agree. Yes.
So, your car insurance comes around, and if you just automatically renew it and don't review and see if you can get a better deal, you're handing that provider your wealth. So when you start to think about it like that, hey, I'm just giving you my wealth, go have fun with it, instead of me having fun with it, you'll take a very different approach.
Oh, I couldn't agree more, Jen. That's a good way of a loyalty tax. You bet.
Yeah. The other thing, of course, is, I always say to everybody inside my course is never buy non-perishables at full price. So when I do my grocery shopping, I do it online, because when you're online, you can see what's going into your cart. You can see what the dollars are looking like. You're also not caught by the marketing tactics of supermarkets, and supermarkets are the masters at it. When you come through the entry point, you're at the fruit and veggies. So it's nice and bright. There's good smells. It puts you in a happy mood. And of course, when you're in a happy mood, you go and spend more. Breads and milks and things are at the back. So they force you to walk through the aisles. When you do online shopping, you don't have that. And I'm talking grocery shopping here. We'll get quickly to the other stuff. But the first thing I do is I go in, and in my app, I shop the half price specials. And so I go and I grab the toilet paper, the tissues, the washing powder, whatever's on special. I do that. Then I buy the perishables that I have to buy. So, the fruit and veggies, the milk, the cheese, the bread, whatever it is that I need. Whatever is left that I've allocated is where I can now go and buy those things that the supermarket want me to buy, which is the chocolate biscuits, the things that are nice to have, but they're not part of it. And so when people tell me you can't get ahead with the cost of living as it is, absolutely you can. There's a strategy. You've just got to apply that strategy, which is what I just said.
Isn't that fascinating? I guess I do it in a subconscious way, because my wife and I guess you and I both have the fact that we've got adult children living in our house. We don't buy for 2, we buy for 5. And so when you're buying for 5, we buy in bulk. And so we go to bulk providors. I'm not going to name those particular companies, but they're not the duopoly of, I'm going to say these names, Coles and Woolies. Mm-hmm. There are other players out there. And so we will go to a number of these, because we're not buying for 1 week. We buy for 3 months at a go. And it's amazing when you are buying at that scale, all of a sudden, things like laundry detergent, paper towels, toilet paper, all of a sudden become a reasonable price. Online, I buy coffee beans online because I'm a snob, and I know what I like, and I don't like paying $90 a kilo at certain places. If I buy online, I can buy for a third of that, and it's delivered to my doorstep. So, there are ways and means of getting around a lot of these things.
Can I make one point there, Ray?
Yeah, please.
Just because you're buying in bulk doesn't always mean it's cheaper. So I'm going to say here that I'm a nerd, and I went and put together a list of what I could buy it at Woolies, what I could buy it at Coles, and what I could buy it at those bulk places.
Yep.
They have you in. Some products are cheaper, some are not. So again, there's still a tactic behind it. So, the shampoo, for example, that I use, when I buy it at the major supermarkets on half price, because that's the only time I buy it, it's the exact same price as it was at the bulk one.
Yeah. But again, I think legislation has come a long way. So when it comes to cost of living and being able to get a decent barometer, the Competition Commission has now mandated that they've got to put a price per litre or price per kilo. And so they've outlawed these predatory pricing where they charge per item rather than on a weight. And it's still, some will still do it, which is annoying. They're not allowed to. It's against the consumer law to do so. But there are ways and means. And again, I can remember when I first started living with my wife, she never bothered looking at grocery prices. I looked at it like a hawk, because when we were talking about debt previously, and it's what you grow up with, I mean, you know, you lived in a quiet household. I lived in an incredibly raucous household. There were fights all the time, and it was fights about money. Why? Because there was none. We didn't have money. Yeah, there was no money in the house, and there were fights all the time about who got the chocolate biscuit or who got this or who got, and it was all down to economics. And so, you know, I learned to budget very early on and have kept that process. I mean, I make more money these days, there's no doubt, but I still keep an eye. It's just, I think it's part of the muscle memory, don't you find?
Yeah. So I'll say two things there. Firstly, when you go, well, the thing that I find, and, you know, I'm like you, I budget, you know, I don't budget, but I've worked out what my costs are, but I shop on, you know, a budget as such. But the other day when I was at the supermarket, you know, we buy soft drinks because everybody in our family packs their lunch and they take a can of soft drink. Now, I automatically went to pick up the box of 24 cans that was on 40% special, because you would think special, it's cheaper. And I read the label, and the 30 box, even though it wasn't on special, was still cheaper than the 24 box.
Isn't that amazing?
That's where supermarkets get it, because everybody goes, oh, 40% off, it's much cheaper, and grabs it. It's not always cheaper just because it's on special. And the same thing was, I forget what the other thing I was looking at the other day that was on special, and the bigger lot to buy was still cheaper, even though the smaller package. And I've forgotten what the second thing that you were talking about.
That's okay.
You know, that's my old age memory.
Sure. So in your blog, you talk about every dollar has a job before it lands. Can you explain what you mean by that? I like the terminology, but I'd like to delve a little bit deep into that.
Yeah, so that's the strategy behind dollars that we talk about, that, you know, takes the emotion out of it. So every dollar when it comes in is either there to pay a bill, day-to-day living, putting aside for the nice things in life, or the Christmas presents, birthday presents, the emergency fund, and I always say have a short-term goal and a long-term goal. So a short-term goal is less than 12 months, long-term goals over 12 months. So when that dollar comes into your bank account, you need to allocate it to one of those so that you've got the procedures and the systems in place to manage the money. Because if you don't manage it, it gets spent. And that's where I was saying earlier, the tap and go.
That's the easy part. Spending's not a problem.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden, you know, the car rego comes in and people haven't got the $1,000 sitting aside that they need to. So but ultimately for me...
I just want to quickly jump in there. Do you find, though, that with the tap and go scenarios that we're in, particularly after COVID now, the cash has just about disappeared off the face of the planet. When we were dealing in hard currency, was budgeting and spending a lot easier, or is it harder now because of this pay and wave and you just don't see it?
It's definitely harder to budget now, because when you hand over cash, it has a pain point in your brain. I'm very big on the philosophy around money and dealing with money. And so if you walk out and you've got to hand out $200 for something, you have that pain point in your brain where you tap, it doesn't have anything, because you're not doing that exchange.
Yeah.
So our brains take a lot longer to catch up on technology and the world. And it does, but I also find, and this is quite, I don't know, I'm going to go out there and say it. People may or may not agree. If you've got cash in your wallet, you will spend it. Human nature. You go shopping, you can't come home with that money in your wallet. It's one of those things. So, you know, if you've given your money all its accounts and it's all set up, and of course, the only two accounts that will have a card should be your everyday living one, because that's the one you're going to do your grocery shopping. That's the one you're buying your coffee on the way to work. And then your luxury one, because you want to be able to go shopping and go, I want that dress. So you need to code those very carefully in your on your card or whatever it is that you're using, so that you know which account you're using.
So are you suggesting then that we're probably hard-coded? We couldn't walk into Las Vegas casino and walk out without spending our money. Is that what you're suggesting? That
Absolutely.
we're just hard-coded? Oh, okay.
Absolutely. You are, as humans, we are hard-coded to spend what we have or do what we have. And it comes down to, you think, the research that I've done on it is very much tied into feast or famine that our brain works in.
Okay, fair enough.
So, the food's there, we go and eat because we don't know whether next week's going to be there. And so we have that issue, and I'm not talking food here. When we've got the money, we think, oh, we'll go and spend it. Or I've had a crappy week, I want to feel better, I'll go and spend.
So again, it comes back to the psychology. Look, we're just about to wrap up. We're talking about a system that can reduce pressure even if wages aren't rising. And again, I love your concepts here, and I'm going to draw people to your blog. What's one simple change listeners can make between now and their next payday that would help in this struggle with cost of living, do you think?
So the one thing that they could do, well, there's actually two that they need to do. One is to find out where they're spending, so that they can, knowledge is power. Find out where you're spending, put a plan in place. The second one is to go and open separate bank accounts. Give your money buckets to sit in, so that it's very pigeonholed. And I always say, I use the argument, if you want to go and buy a new car, so you've just got your license, and think back to the day you wanted your freedom to go and do what you wanted, you would have a savings account for the new car that you wanted. And, you knew that was going to give you the freedom. You didn't have to go and ask mum or dad, could you borrow the car? You are very siloed into the process and the goal that you want to do. And so you set up those separate bank accounts. You can't touch that money because it's the Christmas birthdays, the dresses and things, or you can't touch that money because it's sitting there to pay bills. But if you don't know what you've got to put aside for those things, you can't make any decisions.
Okay, we're out of time. Jen Richardson, always a pleasure to have you on the show. I'm going to have you back. It's always so much fun talking to you about debt, money, and making accountant jokes as well, I guess.
I was going to say, I'm talking to an accountant's never been that term. So much fun.
Jen Richardson, thanks for being on Dollars and Making Sense.
Thanks for having me.